it's no wonder that people like the French government are casting, I think
you were making it
justified
sound like they were
aspersions.
being sent back to Ukraine, which is why I wanted to push back on that slightly.
Okay. No, I'm not suggesting that, but I think that you need to look really carefully at the reality of this. Only 50 visas have so far been granted under the UK family scheme. That's an absolutely tiny drop in the ocean compared to what will be required.
But,
the
okay,
parameters
ladies,
that
I'm
sorry,
going
on
to.
that,
are not
actually,
good
the
enough.
latest figures on that is that actually the application numbers have been increased from 500 a week to
That's the
6,000 a
application
week.
numbers.
So
That's not the numbers which have
that
been
is the
granted.
start. That's
Okay,
the start.
ladies, I'm going to sort of jump in there. Obviously, there's this is a very contested bit of the bill. Claire, I'm going to come to you first. I mean, we're in a situation where we've been speaking to a number of MPs and commentators from Ukraine, and they're very much echoing the plea from President Zelensky for NATO to get involved, particularly around a no-fly zone. NATO leaders have said that that's going to be very difficult. They can't do that. But it's very difficult to explain to people in Ukraine who are in such a desperate situation. What are your views on that?
Well, I mean, it is a desperate situation. And if you see some of the images, civilians are now facing pretty indiscriminate shelling. The Prime Minister wrote an article describing it as sinking into war crime. That's where we are now. So I completely understand why the call for a no-fly zone is there. I understand that from NATO's perspective, though, their fear is enlarging and expanding the conflict across NATO countries. And their fear is having a no-fly zone then gives a hook to Russia to be able to do that. So that's why they're resisting, I think, that call. But I mean, one of the things I think overall has perhaps surprised people, but I think should be welcomed, is there has been a very robust response, I think, from the West as an overall package of things that they're doing, including the economic pressure as well as supplying arms and non-lethal aid as well to Ukraine. But yes, I think we should always be looking at what more we can do.
Kristen, Oswald, what's your thoughts on this? Because we are hearing increasingly, desperate cries for sort of more intervention. We've heard a number of speeches and interventions from President Zelensky, who makes the point, if Ukraine falls, Europe falls. We spoke with a defence advisor in Ukraine just before this panel, who said, President Putin is not just going to stop in Ukraine, that this is going to affect the rest of Europe. What are your views?
I mean, I think it has to stop in Ukraine, and that's why we have to give the fullest support that we can. And, I welcome the support that's been provided so far. I think that we need to be really mindful of keeping ourselves fully appraised of what is needed and what the most effective support is that can be provided. I do think it is interesting and important, actually, the fact that countries around the world, particularly in Europe, but much further afield too, are pretty single-minded in this, in terms of making sure that support that can be provided is provided. But it's going to take a huge effort, and that will include obviously the provision of military support as has been requested and as is being provided. It will need to include the tightening up of the sanctions which are in place, because whichever way you look at that isn't entirely happening as has been suggested, and we really need, I think, to see a huge move there to tighten all of that.
I'm just going to interrupt you because we're going to come on to sanctions and discuss that. But thanks.
But I think the point really that I'm making is it has to be a collection of a number of different methods of support. One kind of support will not do the job, and I think that we do have to accept that this will have to be a sustained and determined support that's provided.
Yes, and sustained is probably going to be going on for quite a long time. Edward Lucas, I mean, I spoke to a Ukrainian journalist this on my show, and she made the point. She said, look, I think NATO may change their mind. I think NATO may have to change their mind on a no-fly zone. Do you think there's any possibility of that happening?
I think that we should be really ashamed that Ukraine is defending NATO at the moment. And I also remember the Bosnian War, which in the 1990s, where for ages we were told this can't happen, that can't happen, it's militarily impossible, there's no political will, can't do it. And then in the end, when the agony became so great, the scenes of suffering after the shelling of the market in Sarajevo, then suddenly it did become possible. So I think that opinion is shifting in the West, and we're already seeing a much more robust response. I've just seen on Twitter, and it may even be true, that Antony Blinken has said that there's a green light for countries like Poland to send their MiGs, their Soviet Russian-made aircraft, to the Ukrainian Air Force. I'm not actually sure that the no-fly zone is what we want, because a lot of these attacks are not from aircraft; they are from artillery and from rockets and from missiles, and so that would actually require a different sort of military response. But I do think the ground is shifting, and I also think that if we have a choice, we're going to have an almighty confrontation with Russia. It's going to be really horrible and really expensive and really dangerous, and we can either do it now, while we've got 44 million Ukrainians and a functioning Ukrainian state and got them on our side, or we let Ukraine be turned into another Syria, blasted to pieces with heavy artillery. And then we have the same problem, but in 2 years' time, defending the Baltic states, which will be more difficult. Now, I think if we're going to do this, the risk of inaction is greater than the risk of action.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Our listeners on Times Radio are really torn on this. We have lots of people messaging in now just saying cannot go and get involved in a no-fly zone, understand the arguments about sort of World War III, but a lot of people are also messaging in saying it does feel tragic that,
I think World War III's already started. It's just we haven't noticed it yet.
Yeah, and a lot of people also just saying that heartbreaking that it does feel like not that much more will be done. But as Kristen said, there are other strings to this bow, and the refugee crisis is a huge part of this as well. And Claire, I want to come back to you. We've been discussing with Plan International the situation with refugees, absolutely horrendous. But one question has come in about the borders and nationality bill, and there is we spoke with a former head of the diplomatic service who is in the Lords now as a crossbencher, saying that it is quite problematic that there is a clause in this bill which says that any Ukrainian refugees that came to Britain, it would be illegal for them to come the way the clause is drafted at the moment. What do you feel about that clause? Do you think the Home Secretary should change it and listen to campaigners?
Well, I'm not completely familiar with the clause, but I believe it's the one where if people come via an illegal route. And one of the things that we've done is obviously we've got an application centre in Ukraine, and we're also working with neighbouring countries for application routes. We've also got places, for example, I think there was some news about people going to Calais. We've got application centres in Paris as well. So in all of these countries, there are centres that people can go to make sure they go through the proper routes. And it's difficult to find the balance on these things, but I do think it's really important that we have an idea of who's coming into the country and that people are coming through appropriate routes so that we can provide support as well when they get here. That makes that process easier as well. But one of the things that we saw this week was Priti Patel opening up new channels for refugees as well, a new humanitarian corridor so that people can get sponsored by voluntary organisations and make some of those options broader than the family visa that we had before.
Yes, we're going to be actually speaking to a lady who is in Warsaw. She's at the Warsaw Visa Centre, the British Visa Centre. I've interviewed her. She's trying to get a visa for her family, and it's not proving to be terribly easy. But we're going to be playing that interview after 6 o'clock. Kirsten, Oswald, where do you think we are in terms of Britain's response on the refugee crisis, and what's your feeling about this bill? Because a lot of people are very worried about this nationality and borders bill, this particular clause.
I mean, I think they're absolutely right to be worried. We're not in the place that we should be. And, to go to that, first of all, the notion that we are essentially criminalising people for coming to here via what Claire describes as an illegal route, I think should really make us pause for thought. Think about the people who are in Ukraine at the moment, for instance. So they would clearly have to come via a third country to come to the UK. Clearly, they couldn't hop on a plane in Ukraine to come here directly. That's obviously not possible just now. So they would have to travel, and they then risk being criminalised. And of course, before we were even considering refugees from Ukraine, people were travelling here, and they were travelling here because they were desperate and they were fleeing war or in, some kind of dreadful situation. And to criminalise people who are in these most perilous of circumstances is completely wrong. I can't begin to understand why, this is something that we would see people defending now, when it's, I think so pressing and so urgent and obvious why this is a problem, although of course it's been a problem up to now. What we need to do is we need to remove the barriers that are there. We need to waive the visa requirements. Nobody's suggesting to Claire that we wouldn't know who was entering, but that's a very different situation from the one that we face at the moment. We have
Claire,
only 50.
Well, can I just come back on that?
Yeah,
Because,
hang on, Claire, do you want to come back on that?
yes, I would actually just come back on that, because I do think that is misdescribing the current situation. Because Priti Patel has said, for example, in Calais, where some people from Ukraine have turned up, she has people there helping to support the system. So I don't think it is the case that anyone wants to criminalise anyone trying to get to the UK.
That's what that bill does.
Just trying to set up the right application centres in the right places so that we can support them into the system.
Well, they're obviously not in the right places, Claire. So that is what the bill does. And they can't be in the right places, because I heard Priti Patel on the news as well saying that there are people on the ground in Calais, and I don't dispute that. I've no reason at all to do that. But these are the same people who are being sent back to Paris to be given the opportunity to apply there for a visa. Now, that's absolutely ridiculous. That's not good enough at all. It's no wonder that people like the French government are casting, I think
you were making it sound like they were being sent back to Ukraine, which is why I wanted to push back on that slightly.
Okay. No, I'm not suggesting that, but I think that you need to look really carefully at the reality of this. Only 50 visas have so far been granted under the UK family scheme. That's an absolutely tiny drop in the ocean compared to what will be required.
But, okay.
The parameters,
ladies, I'm
sorry. On that,
actually,
the latest figures on that is that actually the application numbers have been increased from 500 a week to 6,000.
That's the application numbers. So that's not the numbers which have been granted.
Okay, ladies, I'm going to sort of jump in there. Obviously, this is a very contested bit of the bill, and I'm conscious I want to bring Edward in as well. We haven't managed to get Kate Osmore from the Labour Party, but we are hoping to get Angela Eagle. Dame Angela Eagle is going to join us hopefully after 5:30.